The thing about first contact protocols, Ambassador Kethavar mused while adjusting his ceremonial throat spikes, was that they assumed everyone involved understood basic civilization. The document floating before his compound eyes outlined 17 different scenarios for meeting warrior castes, priest castes, merchant castes, and scholar castes. It did not, unfortunately, contain a single paragraph about what to do when the species in question appeared to be catastrophically disorganized. They have no visible military hierarchy, Tactical Assessor Zrixon reported, his carapace clicking with obvious distress. No warrior compounds, no training academies, no ceremonial combat arenas. It's as if they've forgotten how to properly structure a society. Kethavar's tentacles writhed in what his species considered deep contemplation. 3 months of orbital observation had yielded nothing but confusion. Earth's inhabitants seemed to wander around doing whatever struck their fancy at any given moment. Farmers who built machines, healers who studied warfare, teachers who commanded respect without displaying a single battle scar. It was deeply unsettling. Perhaps, offered cultural analyst Myrn from her position near the viewscreen, their warrior caste is deliberately hidden. Some species conceal their military strength until threatened. Hidden where? Zrixon's mandibles twitched skeptically. We've scanned every continent. They have structures they call bases, but the humans there spend most of their time exercising, eating, and complaining about their superiors. Real warriors would be training, meditating, or at minimum sharpening something. The observation deck of the consortium vessel. Prudent inquiry hummed with frustrated activity. Representatives from 12 different species had gathered to solve the human problem, and they were no closer to answers than when they'd arrived. The humans had cheerfully agreed to meet with them, which was itself suspicious. Proper warrior castes didn't cheerfully do anything. I've reviewed their historical records, announced historian Kethtel, his voice resonating from the translation device grafted behind his ear slits. They fight constantly, wars, revolutions, something called sports, but they never seem to follow proper combat protocols. Their conflicts involve everyone. Merchants fight alongside warriors, scholars develop weapons, even their food preparers take sides. Barbaric, muttered Myrn. Her species, the Veltar, had perfected civilization by ensuring each caste knew its place and stayed there. The idea of a cook having opinions about military strategy was genuinely nauseating. Kethavar straightened his spine ridge, decision crystallizing in his mind. We'll request an audience with their leadership. Someone must be in charge of their military. Find me their war chief, battle master, or whatever title they use for the individual who commands their fighters. The communications officer, a Zephyrian whose name contained 17 consonants, and thus went by Bob, manipulated his control interface with practiced efficiency. Earth Station 1 is responding, Ambassador. They're asking what we mean by war chief. Tell them we want to speak with whoever leads their warrior caste. Bob's tentacles danced across the controls. A pause. They say they don't have a warrior caste, but they can send up their liaison for xenobiology studies, someone named Dr. Vasquez. Zrixon's carapace rattled with indignation. A scholar? We ask for their greatest warrior and they send us a scholar? Perhaps, Kethavar said carefully. This is a test. Maybe their warriors disguise themselves as scholars to assess threats. 2 hours later, the human shuttle docked with prudent inquiry, with what could only be described as casual competence. No ceremonial approaches, no ritualistic challenges, no displays of martial prowess, just efficient maneuvering and a polite request for docking clearance. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from the airlock like someone arriving for a pleasant social call. She stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, possessed an unremarkable bipedal frame, and wore clothing that suggested she'd dressed for comfort rather than intimidation. Her hair was pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, a style that would have left any sensible warrior's neck dangerously exposed. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she announced, extending one hand in the human greeting gesture while juggling a tablet and what appeared to be a beverage container with the other. "I have to say, this is the most exciting thing to happen since the Peterson incident, and that involved 3 departments, 2 containment breaches, and a very confused graduate student." Kethvar found himself momentarily speechless. This was humanity's response to first contact? This cheerful, apparently weaponless individual who referenced something called a Peterson incident, as if everyone should know what that meant? "You are Dr. Vasquez?" he managed. "That's me, Elena. And your ambassador, sorry, I'm terrible with names that have apostrophes in them. I've got your species listed as Kethvarian in my notes, but I'm guessing that's not quite right." "I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Morden hegemony," he replied, his throat spikes extending slightly in what his species considered a formal introduction. "We have come to speak with your warriors." Elena paused, her beverage halfway to her lips. "My warriors?" "Your species' warrior caste," Myrn interjected, her translator rendering her words with appropriate diplomatic courtesy. "We wish to understand your military structure before proceeding with formal relations." "Oh." Elena's face brightened with apparent understanding. "You want to talk to the military? Well, that's going to be a bit complicated." "Complicated how?" Zrixon demanded, his tactical assessment protocols clearly triggered by the word. Elena gestured vaguely toward Earth, visible through the station's viewports. "We don't really organize things the way you might expect. I mean, we have people who wear uniforms and salute each other and everything, but the whole caste system thing isn't really our speed." Kethvar felt his tentacles knot with frustration. "Every civilized species has military castes. Who fights your wars?" "Well," Elena said, settling into one of the chairs the humans had provided and taking a thoughtful sip of her drink. "That depends on the war, really. Sometimes it's the people in uniforms, sometimes it's whoever happens to be around when trouble starts. During the food wars of 2157, most of the fighting was done by agricultural engineers and restaurant workers. Very passionate about proper seasoning, that bunch." The assembled aliens exchanged what could only be described as deeply concerned glances. "But who commands them?" Myrn pressed. "Who decides strategy, allocates resources, determines battle formations?" "Committees, mostly," Elena replied with a shrug that somehow managed to convey both casualness and complete comfort with chaos. "Though during emergencies, people tend to just sort things out as they go. We're pretty good at improvising." Kethtel leaned forward, his historian's instincts clearly pinging. "You mentioned food wars. Surely such conflicts required proper military leadership." Elena's grin suggested she was enjoying this conversation far more than any reasonable person should. "Oh, the food wars were fascinating from an organizational standpoint. See, it started when the Mars colonies declared independence over shipping costs for real coffee. Earth said, 'Fine, enjoy your synthetic caffeine.' Mars said, 'Fine, enjoy your synthetic protein.' Within 6 months, you had agricultural scientists weaponizing crop diseases, logistics coordinators running blockades, and short-order cooks organizing guerrilla raids on supply convoys." "But the warriors," Zrixon began. "Were probably making coffee and complaining about the whole mess like everyone else," Elena finished. "Look, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. You keep asking about our warrior caste like we've got a bunch of people sitting around in armor waiting for someone to tell them who to fight. That's not really how we work." Kethvar's spine ridge was now fully extended in what his species considered extreme agitation. "Then how do you maintain order? How do you defend your territory? How do you resolve conflicts between groups?" Elena considered this, swirling the liquid in her container thoughtfully. "Well, Mostly, we argue about it until someone comes up with a solution that annoys everyone equally. Then we implement that solution while continuing to argue about it. It's not elegant, but it works. This is impossible, Myrn declared, her translator adding emphasis that made her species' equivalent of shouting quite clear. No society can function without proper caste. Distinctions. There must be leaders and followers, warriors and workers, those who command and those who obey. Must there? Elena asked, and there was something in her tone, a subtle shift that made several of the aliens suddenly pay closer attention. That's an interesting assumption. Zrixon's tactical protocols were now screaming warnings at him, though he couldn't quite identify the threat. You're claiming humans have no military structure whatsoever? Oh, we have structure, Elena said, her grin widening in a way that was probably meant to be reassuring, but somehow wasn't. Just not the kind you're expecting. Would you like to see how it works? The silence that followed was the kind that occurs when everyone present realizes they've been asking the wrong questions, but nobody's quite sure what the right ones are. Yes, Kethvar said finally. Show us. Elena raised her beverage container in what might have been a toast. Excellent. Fair warning, though. You might want to adjust your expectations about what constitutes a warrior. We tend to be a bit more flexible in our definitions than most species. As she spoke, her free hand was already manipulating her tablet with casual efficiency, and Kethvar found himself wondering why a simple academic had such quick, precise finger movements. Almost like someone who'd spent considerable time operating complex equipment under pressure. Almost like someone who'd been trained for something other than scholarly pursuits. The thought was deeply unsettling. Elena's arrangements proceeded with the kind of terrifying efficiency that should have been the first warning sign. Within 30 minutes, she had coordinated with ground control, scheduled orbital clearance for observation craft, and somehow procured what she cheerfully called the good viewing angle for what humans apparently considered a routine training exercise. Now, she said, settling back into her chair with the satisfied air of someone about to enjoy a particularly entertaining show. I should probably mention that what you're about to see isn't actually a military demonstration. It's just Tuesday. Bob's tentacles froze over his translation interface. Tuesday? It's a day of the week, Elena explained helpfully. This particular Tuesday happens to be when Training Unit Gamma runs their integrated response scenarios. Completely standard stuff. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying a section of Earth's surface that looked disturbingly normal. Rolling hills, a few structures, some vehicles moving around with apparent purpose. Nothing that screamed fearsome military display. I don't see any warriors, Zrixon complained, his tactical sensors working overtime to identify threats that stubbornly refused to appear. That's because you're looking for the wrong thing, Elena replied, taking another sip of her beverage. Watch the medic. She highlighted a figure moving between what appeared to be injured personnel. The individual wore white markings and carried what was clearly medical equipment. Standard battlefield healer, by any reasonable assessment. Except the medic was also carrying what looked like a weapon. Your healers are armed? Myrn asked, her cultural analysis protocols throwing error messages. Well, she's not going to leave herself defenseless, Elena said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. Dr. Chen there has her field medical certification, her combat medic rating, her small arms qualification, her demolitions permit, and her tactical communication specialty. Oh, and she speaks 4 languages fluently. On screen, Dr. Chen finished treating a patient, immediately shifted to coordinating an evacuation, then seamlessly transitioned to providing covering fire for her colleagues, without changing expression or appearing to consider these as separate tasks. Kethtel's historical databases were making alarming noises. In civilized societies, healers heal and warriors fight. The roles are distinct for obvious reasons. Are they? Elena asked with genuine curiosity. Why? Because, Kethtel paused, his certainty evaporating under scrutiny. Because specialization ensures efficiency. Because mixing roles leads to confusion and ineffectiveness. Elena gestured towards the screen, where Dr. Chen was now simultaneously directing a medical evacuation while jamming enemy communications and calling in artillery support. Does she look confused to you? Before anyone could answer, Elena highlighted another figure. That's engineering specialist Rodriguez. He builds bridges, detonates obstacles, repairs equipment, and when necessary turns construction tools into improvised weapons. Yesterday he was designing water purification systems. Tomorrow he'll probably be teaching a seminar on sustainable architecture. Rodriguez proceeded to demonstrate this versatility by constructing a defensive position, destroying an enemy emplacement, and then immediately beginning repairs on damaged infrastructure. All while maintaining radio contact in what sounded like at least 3 different languages. This is impossible, Zrixon declared, his carapace now clicking with what his species considered existential dread. You cannot have warriors who heal, healers who fight, and builders who destroy. The cognitive load alone would... Would what? Elena interrupted, her tone still cheerful, but with an edge that made the universal translators work harder. Would make them more adaptable, more resourceful, better able to handle unexpected situations. The demonstration continued, each human performing what should have been specialized roles with casual competence. A communications officer who doubled as a psychological warfare specialist, a logistics coordinator who could also function as a sniper, a chaplain who provided both spiritual guidance and tactical assessment. How do they train for so many functions? Myrn whispered, her cultural certainties crumbling like sand castles. Same way anyone learns anything, Elena replied. Practice, study, more practice, and the occasional catastrophic failure that teaches you not to make the same mistake twice. Humans are remarkably good at learning from their mistakes. But the inefficiency, Kethvar began. What inefficiency? Elena pulled up a data display showing response times, success rates, and casualty figures. Our integrated teams consistently outperform specialists in complex scenarios. Turns out that when everyone understands everyone else's job, they work together better. On screen, the training exercise reached its climax with what appeared to be a complete breakdown of the original plan. Equipment failed, communications were jammed, and the scenario shifted from simple tactical maneuvers to something approaching controlled chaos. The aliens watched in fascination and horror as the humans immediately adapted. Command structures reformed without apparent discussion. Roles shifted as needed. The medic took point when her skills became most relevant. The engineer assumed leadership when technical expertise was required, and the chaplain coordinated the final assault because he happened to have the best view of the situation. This is madness, Zrixon muttered. This is Tuesday, Elena corrected. You should see what happens when we're actually trying. When you're trying. Kethvar's tentacles had gone rigid with alarm. This isn't your military at full capability? Elena's smile became positively predatory. Ambassador, what you just watched was a training exercise conducted by junior personnel using practice ammunition in a controlled environment with safety protocols and medical supervision. She paused for effect. These are college students earning extra credit for their xenobiology degrees. The silence that followed was the kind that occurs when everyone present realizes they've been catastrophically wrong about something fundamental. Bob was the first to speak. College students? Graduate level, to be fair, Elena said generously. Most of them are working on advanced degrees in various fields. Military training is just a general education requirement. You know, like mathematics or literature, everyone picks up the basics. The basics, Myrn repeated faintly. Combat medicine, tactical assessment, equipment maintenance, psychological resilience, leadership principles, technological adaptation, the usual foundation courses every citizen needs. Elena gestured dismissively. Nothing fancy. Kethtel's historical databases were now producing sounds that suggested imminent system failure. Every citizen receives military training? Not military training, Elena corrected, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. Adaptability training, crisis management, resource optimization, the ability to function effectively when normal systems break down. She paused thoughtfully. Which they do, with remarkable frequency. Humans seem to specialize in finding new ways for things to go wrong. But who leads them? Zrixon demanded. In combat situations, someone must command whoever's best qualified for the specific situation, Elena replied. Sometimes that's the person with the highest rank. Sometimes it's the person with the most relevant experience. Sometimes it's whoever has the best idea at the moment. We're flexible about it. The demonstration was winding down, with the human students conducting what appeared to be a casual post-exercise analysis. They critiqued each other's performance with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd been through this routine countless times. I need to ask directly, Kethavar said, his voice carrying the weight of growing desperation. Where are your actual warriors? Your professional soldiers? Your dedicated military caste? Elena turned from the view screen to face him directly, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her expression became completely serious. Ambassador, she said quietly, you've been looking at them this entire time. The problem isn't that we're hiding our warriors from you. The problem is that you don't recognize what a human warrior looks like. She gestured toward the screen, where the college students were packing up their equipment with the same casual competence they'd displayed throughout the exercise. Every human you've observed, every single one, is a potential warrior. We don't separate the roles because we can't afford to. When crisis comes, everyone fights. When someone needs healing, everyone helps. When something needs building, everyone contributes. Her smile returned, but it was different now. Sharper. We learned a long time ago that survival depends on everyone being able to do everything. The assembled aliens absorbed this information with the collective realization that their entire understanding of human society had been not just wrong, but catastrophically, fundamentally wrong. How many humans know these skills? Myrn asked weakly. Elena's expression became thoughtful. Well, let's see. Mandatory education covers the basics, so that's everyone. Advanced training varies by interest and profession, but most adults have at least secondary specializations. Then there are the hobbyists. Humans have a disturbing tendency to study warfare, medicine, engineering, and psychology for fun. She pulled up what appeared to be educational statistics. Current estimates suggest that approximately 97% of adult humans possess skills that other species would classify as military relevant. 97%, Kethvar repeated numbly. The other 3% are either too young for training or conscientious objectors who focus on pure research fields, Elena explained, though even the pacifists usually know basic first aid and crisis management. You know, just in case. Bob's tentacles had gone completely limp. Your entire population is your military? Our entire population is our population, Elena corrected gently. Military, medical, engineering, agricultural, educational. We don't really see the point in limiting people to single functions. Seems wasteful. The implications hit the assembled aliens simultaneously. They hadn't been talking to Earth's liaison to its military. They'd been talking to its military. They hadn't been observing humanity's specialized warrior caste. They'd been observing humanity. All of it. "I think," Elena said, finishing her beverage and standing with the satisfied air of someone who'd accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do. "You're going to want to see some historical context for how this all developed. The evolution of human adaptability makes much more sense when you understand what we've been adapting to." Her smile returned to its original cheerful brightness, but now the aliens could see what they'd missed before. The predatory patience of someone who'd been systematically demolishing their preconceptions while letting them think they were asking the questions. "Shall we schedule part 3 of your education for tomorrow?" The delegation returned the following day with reinforcements and what could charitably be called a collective nervous breakdown. Word had spread through the consortium fleet that humanity's military capabilities might be somewhat more extensive than initially calculated. Representatives from 6 additional species had joined the original group, each bringing their own cultural anxieties and increasingly desperate theories about human social organization. Elena arrived precisely on time, carrying what appeared to be a small archive device and wearing the same disturbingly cheerful expression that had haunted several aliens' sleep cycles. "I brought visual aids," she announced, connecting her device to the station's display systems, with movements that suggested she'd done this many times before. "Nothing quite explains human development like a good historical montage." "Before we begin," interrupted cultural theorist Vextu, a newcomer whose species prided themselves on sociological analysis, "I must ask, surely your records have been edited for diplomatic purposes, sanitized to present your species in the best possible light?" Elena paused, her hand hovering over the control interface. "You want the unedited version?" "We require complete accuracy to understand your developmental patterns," Vextu declared, with the confidence of someone who'd never regretted asking for complete accuracy. "All right then." Elena's fingers danced across the controls. "Let's start with agriculture." The screen filled with images of early human settlements. Peaceful enough, by most standards. People growing crops, domesticating animals, building permanent structures. Exactly what every species did when transitioning from nomadic to agricultural life. Standard progression, noted agricultural specialist Morith, whose people had perfected farming techniques millennia ago. Crop cultivation, animal husbandry, settlement establishment. Nothing unusual here. "Keep watching," Elena suggested. The historical record continued, showing human agriculture expanding and developing. Still normal. Then the display shifted to show what happened when these peaceful farmers encountered raiders, natural disasters, and resource competition. Within 3 frames, the farmers had become fortifications engineers. The shepherds had organized rapid response cavalry, and the crop specialists were weaponizing their agricultural knowledge to create both siege defenses and economic warfare strategies. "They militarized their food production," Morth whispered, his vocal sacs deflating with what his species considered profound distress. "We optimized our resource management," Elena corrected mildly. "When people try to steal your crops, you learn to protect them. When weather threatens your harvest, you develop contingency plans. When trade partners become unreliable, you become self-sufficient." She advanced to the next historical period. The farmers who survived weren't just good at farming. They were good at everything farming required. The display now showed human merchants, and Zrixon felt his tactical assessment protocols stutter with recognition. These weren't the specialized trade castes he expected. Human merchants were explorers, diplomats, intelligence gatherers, cultural infiltrators, and economic warriors all simultaneously. "Your traders were spies," he accused. "Our traders were traitors," Elena replied. "They just happened to be very thorough about it. When you're investing significant resources in foreign markets, you want to understand political stability, resource availability, cultural compatibility, technological development, and military capabilities. Basic risk assessment. The historical record showed human merchants establishing trade networks that looked suspiciously like intelligence networks, creating commercial relationships that functioned as defensive alliances, and developing economic strategies that could either build or topple governments. This is economic warfare, declared financial analyst Kripna, whose species had invented accounting and considered it a sacred art. This is business, Elena countered. Humans learned early that commerce and conflict are two sides of the same strategic coin. The same skills that help you negotiate a favorable trade agreement help you navigate a diplomatic crisis. The same networks that move goods efficiently can move information and influence just as effectively. Historian Keth Tell was making rapid notes, his academic protocols clearly overwhelmed. But where are your dedicated scholars? Your priest castes? Your specialized intellectual classes? Elena grinned with what was becoming a familiar expression of anticipatory satisfaction. Oh, you're going to love this part? The display shifted to show human, educational institutions, religious organizations, and research facilities. Finally, something that looked normal to the alien observers. Dedicated buildings for learning, clear hierarchies of knowledge, specialized roles for different types of intellectual pursuit. Then Elena showed them what these institutions actually produced. Universities that developed both theoretical physics and practical weapons applications. Religious organizations that provided spiritual guidance while running massive logistical networks capable of coordinating disaster relief, political resistance, and social services. Research facilities that seamlessly transitioned between pure science and applied engineering depending on immediate needs. Your scientists are weapons developers, Vextu stated with growing alarm. Our scientists are scientists, Elena said patiently. Knowledge is knowledge. The same principles that explain how stars work also explain how to harness nuclear energy. The same chemistry that creates medicines can create explosives. The same mathematics that describes planetary motion can calculate ballistic trajectories. She shrugged. We don't see the point in limiting how knowledge gets applied. The historical progression continued, showing human intellectual development accelerating at rates that made the alien observers increasingly uncomfortable. Each new discovery led not just to specialized advancement, but to cross-disciplinary applications that revolutionized multiple fields simultaneously. But surely, protested philosophical advisor Wendell, whose species had achieved enlightenment through rigorous separation of intellectual domains, such mixing of knowledge categories must lead to confusion, ethical conflicts, dangerous applications of information? Oh, absolutely, Elena agreed cheerfully. Humans have a terrible track record with responsible knowledge management. We've accidentally poisoned ourselves, blown up our own facilities, created weapons we couldn't control, and developed technologies that nearly destroyed our civilization several times. The aliens exchanged glances that suggested this admission wasn't as reassuring as Elena seemed to think it was. But, she continued, we learned from those mistakes, sometimes. Eventually, after sufficient catastrophic consequences. Her expression became thoughtful. Human intellectual development is less about avoiding dangerous knowledge and more about learning to manage it responsibly. We tend to discover first and figure out the ethics later. That's terrifying, Bob said flatly. That's humanity, Elena replied, though I should mention that our approach to managing dangerous knowledge is typically to make sure as many people as possible understand it. Hard to misuse something when everyone knows how it works and what the consequences are. She advanced to more recent historical periods, showing human society developing increasingly complex systems for education, research, and knowledge sharing. What emerged was a picture of a species that had deliberately democratized dangerous information as a safety measure. "You teach warfare to children," observed educational theorist Plixum with evident horror. "We teach critical thinking, resource management, and crisis response," Elena corrected. "The applications are up to the individual, though, yes, basic tactical assessment is usually covered in primary education, right around the same time as mathematics and literature." "Why?" Kethavar demanded, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. "Why would you deliberately create a population capable of such adaptability?" Elena suggested helpfully. "Such resilience? Such ability to respond effectively to unexpected challenges?" She gestured to the historical display, which now showed human responses to various crises throughout their development. Natural disasters, resource shortages, technological failures, external threats, internal conflicts, and cosmic catastrophes. In every case, human society had responded not through specialized castes, but through mass mobilization of broadly trained individuals who could fulfill multiple roles as needed. "Because," Elena said quietly, "we never knew what we'd need to survive. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plague, asteroid impacts, climate shifts, resource depletion, technological disruption, social collapse. Human history is basically a catalog of existential threats that required immediate, creative, adaptive responses." The display showed human communities surviving situations that should have destroyed them, rebuilding from disasters that should have ended their civilization, and emerging stronger from challenges that would have broken species with more rigid social structures. The societies that survived weren't the ones with the most specialized warriors, or the most dedicated scholars, or the most efficient workers, Elena continued. They were the ones where everyone could fight, everyone could think, everyone could build, and everyone could adapt when circumstances changed. "But the inefficiencies," Myrn began weakly. "Were less important than survival," Elena finished. "Turns out that having redundant capabilities and overlapping skill sets is worth the theoretical loss in specialization efficiency. When your primary military caste gets wiped out by plague, you need farmers who can fight. When your scholar caste gets displaced by natural disaster, you need warriors who can think. When your entire social structure collapses, you need individuals who can rebuild it from scratch." The historical record reached the present era, showing human civilization as it currently existed. A complex, dynamic system where role flexibility and adaptive capability were built into every level of society. "So when we ask about your warrior caste," Zrixon said slowly, "and you tell us everyone is a potential warrior, I'm giving you the literal historical truth, Elena. Confirmed. Human survival has depended on everyone being able to do whatever needs doing, whenever it needs doing, however it needs doing. We didn't choose this system because it was elegant or efficient. We chose it because it was the only thing that worked." The assembled aliens sat in contemplative silence, processing the implications of a species that had systematically eliminated the distinction between civilian and military, between specialized and generalist, between follower and leader. "How?" Vex2 asked finally. "Do you maintain social order when everyone is trained to fight, think, and lead independently?" Elena's smile returned, but now it carried undertones that made the universal translators work overtime. "That," she said, "is probably something you should ask my grandmother." The mention of Elena's grandmother had an effect on the assembled delegation that could best be described as immediate and comprehensive dread. Over the past 3 days, they'd learned to fear Elena's casual references to perfectly ordinary things that turned out to be anything but ordinary. "Your grandmother," Kethavar said carefully. Is she significant in your military hierarchy? Elena laughed, actually laughed, with genuine amusement. Abuela Rosa? Oh no, she'd find that hilarious. She always said the military was too boring for her taste. This statement caused what could only be described as a collective system crash among the alien observers. If Elena's grandmother wasn't military, and Elena kept referencing her in the context of human warriors, then— What? Asked Vextu, with the tone of someone approaching a particularly dangerous philosophical precipice. Did your grandmother do for a profession? She was a pediatric surgeon, Elena replied, pulling up what appeared to be family photographs on her display device. Specialized in emergency trauma cases involving children. The image showed an elderly human female with silver hair, laugh lines around her eyes, and hands that looked like they'd spent decades holding delicate instruments with absolute precision. A healer, Myrn said with obvious relief. Finally, a human who fits into proper categorical structures. Well, Elena said thoughtfully, that was her day job. But let me tell you about her background. The family photos shifted to older images, and Elena's voice took on the fond tone of someone sharing cherished memories. Abuela Rosa was born during the Third Continental Conflict, grew up during the Resource Wars, lived through the plague years, survived the Great Collapse, and raised 7 children during the Reconstruction. She put herself through medical school while working 2 jobs and caring for her invalid mother. Finished her surgical residency during the border skirmishes, performed operations in bunkers while artillery fire was shaking the walls. The aliens were beginning to recognize the pattern, but Elena wasn't finished. After the borders stabilized, she established the first pediatric trauma center in the disputed territories. Had to design her own security protocols because the government couldn't guarantee protection for medical facilities. Trained her staff in both surgical techniques and defensive procedures. Built supply networks that could function during blockades, communication blackouts, and infrastructure failures. Bob's tentacles were making involuntary knots. She organized military logistics? She organized whatever was necessary to keep children alive, Elena corrected. When the separatist uprising cut off medical supplies, she developed synthesis protocols for manufacturing critical drugs from locally available resources. When the economic sanctions created artificial scarcities, she established black market connections to acquire surgical equipment. When political instability made hospital locations targets, she created mobile surgical units that could relocate on 6 hours' notice. The photographs showed a progression of images. The young woman studying by candlelight, the medical student working in primitive conditions, the surgeon operating in improvised facilities, the administrator coordinating complex logistics networks. During the technological prohibition movement, when religious extremists were destroying medical equipment as unnatural, she hid advanced surgical tools in household items and taught procedures using coded language disguised as cooking recipes. The casserole instructions she passed down to her grandchildren, half of them are actually surgical protocols. Kethtel's historical databases were producing alarmed noises. She violated religious laws, economic sanctions, government prohibitions. She saved children's lives, Elena said simply. Everything else was just obstacles to work around. The final photographs showed Abuela Rosa in her later years. Teaching, mentoring, coordinating disaster relief efforts, and apparently having the time of her life doing it. After she retired from surgery, she spent 15 years volunteering in disaster zones. Earthquakes, floods, civil conflicts, pandemic outbreaks, anywhere children needed medical care, she went. Organized international relief efforts, established field hospitals, trained local medical staff, and created sustainable healthcare systems in post-disaster areas. Elena paused, her expression becoming contemplative. She died last year at 94, during her response to the Centauri colony medical emergency. Refused evacuation because there were still children who needed surgery. Worked 36 straight hours stabilizing patients before her heart finally decided she'd pushed hard enough for one lifetime. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. By our standards, Zrixon said quietly, your grandmother would be classified as a legendary warrior healer, diplomat, strategist, logistician, intelligence operative. By our standards, Elena replied, she was a doctor who took her job seriously. The implications settled over the delegation like a particularly heavy blanket. How many humans? Kethavar asked, with the tone of someone who already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Have similar backgrounds? Elena consulted her tablet briefly. Well, Rosa's generation lived through particularly interesting times, so their skill sets tend to be more diverse than average. But most humans accumulate multiple specializations over a standard lifespan. Career changes, educational pursuits, volunteer activities, emergency responses, family responsibilities, life tends to demand versatility. She pulled up what appeared to be demographic data. Current planetary population is approximately 12 billion. Of those, roughly 4 billion have direct experience with crisis management, 3 billion have advanced technical training in multiple fields, 2 billion have leadership experience in complex organizational structures, and 6 billion have educational backgrounds that span traditionally separate disciplines. There's overlap in those categories, Bob pointed out weakly. Extensive overlap, Elena confirmed cheerfully. Most humans fall into multiple categories. Rosa, for instance, would count in all of them. Vextu was making calculations with the desperate intensity of someone trying to find reassuring numbers in increasingly alarming data. But surely the majority of your population consists of normal civilians? People who work single jobs, live peaceful lives, possess no unusual capabilities? Elena considered this question with the serious attention it deserved. Define normal, she said finally. Non-military, non-technical, no leadership experience, no crisis training, no multidisciplinary education, standard civilian roles. Elena consulted her data again, her expression growing thoughtful. By those criteria, maybe 8% of the adult population? Though that number's probably high, because it's hard to live to adulthood on Earth without encountering at least one major crisis that requires adaptive response. 8%, Myrn repeated numbly. And that's being generous with the definition of normal, Elena added. For instance, I'm classifying school teachers as civilians, even though they routinely manage complex group dynamics, resolve conflicts, adapt to individual needs, coordinate with multiple authority structures, and maintain operational effectiveness under severe resource constraints. But technically they're not military. So, what about you? Kethavar demanded, finally asking the question that had been building for 3 days. What's your background, Dr. Vasquez? Elena's smile became genuinely warm for the first time since they'd met her. Xenobiology PhD from Luna University, specializing in adaptive evolutionary strategies. Spent 2 years doing field research on Titan during the methane wars. Turned out that studying extremophile organisms in active combat zones provides excellent data on stress responses. Did my postdoc work developing biodefense protocols for the Outer Colony Medical Corps. Currently teaching, though I also consult on terraforming projects and occasionally help with first contact protocols. She paused, her expression becoming mischievous. Oh, and I survived graduate school, 2 pandemics, academic politics, tenure review, 3 university reorganizations, and 4 different grant committee evaluations. Plus, I grew up in Detroit during the Industrial Restoration, which taught me more about urban survival than any formal military training ever could. The assembled aliens absorbed this information with the collective realization that they'd been conducting diplomatic negotiations with someone whose casual background would qualify her as a strategic asset by any reasonable military assessment. So when we asked to speak with your warriors, Zrixon said slowly, and you told us we were looking at them. I meant it literally, Elena confirmed. You wanted to meet Earth's greatest warriors. You've been talking to one for 3 days. She gestured toward the space station around them, toward Earth visible through the viewports, toward the vast complex civilization that had produced both her and her grandmother and 12 billion other humans with similarly improbable combinations of capabilities. The thing you keep missing, she continued gently, is that we don't have warriors because we don't need them. We have people, and people, as it turns out, are far more dangerous than warriors ever could be. The delegation sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that their entire approach to this first contact had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. They'd come looking for Earth's military caste and found something far more alarming. A species that had abolished the distinction between civilian and warrior by making everyone capable of both roles. They'd asked to speak with humanity's greatest fighters and discovered they'd been talking to them all along. They just hadn't recognized what human fighters looked like. Elena finished her beverage and stood, her movements carrying the same casual competence that had characterized everything she'd done over the past 3 days. Any other questions about human social organization? She asked pleasantly. Kethvar managed to find his voice. Just one. How do we proceed with diplomatic relations when we've clearly misunderstood everything about your species? Elena's smile returned to its original cheerful brightness, but now the aliens could see it for what it had always been. The expression of someone who'd been patiently explaining obvious truths to confused visitors while being thoroughly entertained by their misconceptions. The same way Rosa approached surgery, she said, carefully, with respect for what you're dealing with, and with the understanding that everyone involved wants the best possible outcome. She headed toward the airlock, then paused and looked back. Though I should probably mention, next week we're scheduling a cultural exchange program. A few of our people will visit your worlds to learn about your societies. Her grin became positively predatory. I think you'll find our anthropologists quite adaptable. As Elena disappeared into the shuttle, leaving behind a delegation of aliens who were only beginning to comprehend the full implications of what they'd learned, Kethvar made a mental note to warn the consortium that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their numbers, or their military capabilities. It was their grandmothers, and everyone else too.